This ESPN podcast is brought to you by Geico. 15 minutes could save you 15% or more on car insurance. Visit geico.com.
The BS Report is a free-flowing conversation that occasionally touches on mature subjects.
First of all,
This is the BS Report with Bill Simmons.
it might be cool, I don't know. And if it's not, I don't
The
care.
BS Report with Bill Simmons.
Bill Simmons works for ESPN. He's also named the sports guy, and he writes a comical sports column. He must be a popular dude.
The BS Report.
It's got a real dirty sound, like a rusty steak knife cutting through a well-aged steak.
Now.
Here's Bill Simmons.
Welcome to the BS Report Thursday morning here in Southern California. Coming up in a little bit, Chuck Klosterman from Grantland. We're going to talk about a whole bunch of stuff. But right now, the director of Survive and Advance, a 30 for 30 that we premiered a week and a half ago, and people loved it. And now we are re-showing it Thursday night, April 4th, 9 p.m., ESPN2. And then Saturday, 4 p.m., ABC. You want to see this one. It's a good one. If you like 30 for 30 and you didn't see this one, then I don't really understand your logic. But anyway, director Jonathan Hock, how are you?
I'm good, Bill. Thank you. I think it was St. Patrick's Day that it was on, so some people were busy.
Yeah,
Maybe they didn't see it.
We got kind of screwed by the TV night. I mean, a lot of people saw it, but we were going against Walking Dead, which gets like 12 million people. And then the Bible miniseries, which who knew? There were like 13 million people watched that. So we lost 25 million people that might have watched it.
Yeah, but the people who watched our show really liked it. So
Yeah, that was good. And I think when they see the re-airs, they will like it too. But this was the third 30 for 30 you've done for us. The Chris Herron one technically doesn't count as a 30 for 30, but I still feel like spiritually it was a 30 for 30. Is that fair?
I do too. I always talk about it like that. So
Yeah. And then you did the Marcus Dupree one, and you've done the Hockey-mentaries for the Grantland channel, and you did the 30 for 30 short, Jake, which was about a book that I was the only one that I thought loved it, and then we found out that lots of people loved it, which was interesting. I don't know why you just don't work for Grantland. I just think we should just hire you. Let's negotiate it right now.
I wondered that myself, Bill. Let's talk.
Negotiate it. Yeah, let's negotiate it. You should just be part of the team. Tell us about the feedback you got for this NC State one.
I have to say the feedback for this was kind of overwhelming. It seemed to resonate with people in such a powerful way. You know, the previous ones that I had done that you talked about, you know, Marcus and Chris Herron, you know, those were stories that people didn't know so much going into it. So they were sort of struck by how moving their stories were and how powerful these personalities were, and it was kind of a discovery journey for the viewer. And so I kind of was expecting people to be impressed with those. This one I really wasn't sure because everybody knows Jimmy V. Everybody knows, you know, Lorenzo Charles dunking in Wittenberg's air ball and beating Olajuwon and Drexler in Houston. And I mean, Jimmy V is basically the patron saint of ESPN. So everybody knows this story already. So I was very unsure how people would respond. And the enthusiasm has been kind of overwhelming. I mean, from, you know, letters I've been getting from people I don't know to people that I knew when I was a kid who were so moved they had to reach out to me. And, you know, Bob Iger at Disney wrote a note, which I don't know if you get notes from him on the regular, but I don't. And that was really nice. And just, you know, everybody seems to have been really moved by this. It's been pretty gratifying.
Yeah, one of the things I've learned over the years is it's always good to get a Bob Iger email.
It kind of felt like a good thing when it happened.
Yeah, it's always good. It's unless it's an email where he's swearing at you and there's exclamation points, then it's not as good. But
all right, I'll look out for
that's
those.
Fortunately never happened to me. But yeah, I mean the feedback was great, and I think one of the things we forget sometimes, and I was struck by it with this because I was like you, I was like, oh, everybody knows this story. And we just learn over and over again with 30 for 30 series that if you're basically, you basically have to add about 6 years from when something happened and put everybody in that age group and under and just accept the fact that they don't know what happened. So you take something like NC State. Anybody who was 6 years old or under when that happened doesn't remember it. And then everybody else after that who was born from that day on after doesn't remember it either. So really with this happened 30 years ago. And if you're 35 and under, you really don't know what happened.
Yeah,
So like for us, it's like, oh yeah, everybody knows that story. But it's like, no, actually everybody doesn't know that story.
Yeah, I don't hang out with a lot of people that age, so I don't really, I wasn't prepared for it. And I think that it's great to think that, wow, now they know the story and they know it this way and they really responded to it. And now it's really cemented in that's one of the really nice things about doing the 30 for 30s is that it has become sort of the definitive treatment of things. And if you're fortunate enough to take something that is as well known or at least as historic as the 83 NC State team and be the one to do the 30 for 30 of it, you really, I was a history major at college. I never thought I'd write history books or really leave a mark, but this kind of is doing that. This is a historic moment in college sports and in, a few different ways, and we got to be the ones to tell that story. And it's
and as always with these things, it's a little frustrating because you never have enough time to tell all the parts of the story you want to tell. And for me, we hit it in this, but not the way like you almost want to sit there with each viewer and explain to them. So in 1983, the NCAA tournament wasn't even remotely like it is now. All the games weren't televised. I think there were less teams. There was probably like 52 that year.
Yeah, there were the 4 playing games.
Yeah, the concept, and you hit this in the doc, but it really warrants mentioning a second time. The concept of a Cinderella just didn't really exist. Like to that point, Cinderella was just the 1980 Olympic hockey team. But in college basketball, Al McGuire and Marquette, I guess, a tiny bit of a Cinderella, but not really. They still had some of the best players. And just the concept of somebody beating the odds and the upheaval that happened when NC State won those 9 straight games, it never really happened before. And it kind of created March Madness, I feel like. Do you agree with that?
I do. There was a book written about it called When March Went Mad, which was actually our working title for a while we were cutting the film. And it really was the birth of March Madness. And Sonny Vaccaro touches on it at the end. We touch on it at the beginning a little bit with, talking about how amazing college basketball was. But we don't really, the reality in 82, 83 is a lot closer to John Wooden and UCLA winning 10 and 12 years than it is to anything resembling what we have today. The college basketball was not this competitive, anything can happen in March situation. So it was completely took the public by storm. And when Sonny at the end of the film talks about how it changed the game, not just for the fans' experience, that suddenly there was this thing where anything can happen, and now every year you're getting, Valparaiso and all these teams making miracle shots, and it becomes trademark of the tournament. You get Georgetown losing to Villanova, which was different kind of upset because they played each other 4 times that year, and it wasn't like Olajuwon and Drexler and this monstrous team. But what you got starting in 83 was a marketable college basketball. And because in 79, even with Bird and Magic, if they didn't have their pro careers where they became marketed together, we wouldn't think of their college matchup as a heavily marketed thing. And what came after 83 was all the coaches being paid now, because Valvano was the first to really become, to embrace the spotlight and to become, he was the first Nike guy. He was the first guy that Sonny got to brand his outfit. So it's his college team, and the college basketball world that we know today started then.
Yeah, the Larry Bird 79 Indiana State team, which I loved because the Celtics had his rights that year. So I jumped on that bandwagon like no bandwagon jump I've ever made. Like we cared about that team, followed them in newspapers, watched them anytime they were coming on. It was an underdog, but they still had Larry Bird. So It wasn't like this NC State team, which Wittenberg was a highly regarded college player, and Thurl Bailey obviously went on to have a really good pro career. I still feel like the Villanova, I feel like it was a 3-part piece that led to March Madness. Like NC State knocked the wall down. The Villanova thing was still one of the 5 greatest upsets I've ever seen. It's just like that Georgetown team. The difference with that one was they were so much more invincible than the Houston team was. Houston was 5 slam a jamma, but Georgetown was like a monolith at that point. Like nobody was touching them, and I think that was
because it was like the 4th year viewing and they were.
Oh yeah.
But they weren't a better team than Houston at that point, I don't think. I mean, Houston had won, 26 in a row or 28 in a row. The only real loss they had was, as a healthy team, was to Virginia, I think. They lost to Ralph Sampson in Virginia, like in Japan.
But wasn't NC State, they were like 6-point underdogs, right? It wasn't inconceivable that they were going to beat Houston. I remember watching Georgetown Villanova and thinking there's no chance in hell Villanova is going to beat Georgetown. And then as it was happening, going, oh my God, what is going on here?
Until Shoney Schimmel and Louisville beat Baylor, I would say it was the greatest upset I'd ever seen.
So then the third piece and the final piece of the Madness trilogy for me is Loyola Marymount post Hank Gathers. And that was like, as that was going on, it didn't go on long. They only won, I think, 3 or 4 games, but that was like the first real like Cinderella. Oh my God, how is this happening? How are they doing this? And then after that, March Madness just fight. That was like the final piece for me. But the 83 NC State, it's the amazing part, like watching that game again, was how good Olajuwon was. It's almost like he didn't belong in college.
I know, he was amazing. Well, he certainly wouldn't have been there today.
No,
but at that time, you would be in college and be that good.
Yeah,
I mean, Ewing was that good. Ralph Sampson was that good. He was better in college than he ever was as a pro because his knees started to go. But Olajuwon, I didn't remember him having the drop step and the baseline little jumper that I didn't. I remember that sort of happening 2-3 years into his pro career, but he had it then.
And that's what sticks out when you're watching those 9 straight. They go through Sampson, who, historically now has become underrated. His career was so short in the NBA, nobody even remembers how good he was in college and how revered he was as just this unstoppable center. Then they go through that NC State team with Jordan and Perkins and Brad Doherty. They go through Olajuwon and Drexler. I mean, these are Hall of Famers, and the other thing, people are emailing me. I got a couple of sarcastic emails about the doc from people who were like, that should really have been called How Nobody Could Make a Big Free Throw Against North Carolina State. What were there, like 15 missed free throws in the last minute against them?
It was a lot of them. It was a lot of them. But
it was clearly like somebody was watching over them in that tournament.
That's Mike Krzyzewski's feeling. I mean, he said to me with a straight face, we didn't use this in the film because it was very much here's the last word on this soundbite. And what Pam Valvano said at the end, which she's talking about, what Pam Valvano says at the end, not to spoil it in case anybody's still going to watch, was really the final word. So, but what Coach K said was, he said, look, I really believe there are basketball gods. And this guy was destined to have his greatest victory being the creation of the V Foundation and really changing the world and helping mankind beat cancer. That was this guy's great victory. So the basketball gods, in order to make that one happen, gave him this victory, because you can't explain this victory without some kind of divine intervention.
That's pretty interesting.
And he says it with a total straight face. He really believes it. That was one of the great revelations to me, actually, in producing these. There's always great surprises that happen when you're on the road. And when we went with Wittenberg Derek Whittenburg to visit Coach K in his office at Duke, because Whit had said, really got to get Coach K, because at the end they were really, really close. And I said, Coach K's obviously we got to do him because he's Coach K, but we know what he's going to say. He's just going to say the usual stuff, and he's going to be, stiff, and he was so down to earth and so warm and so filled with funny stories and profound emotion, and being really emotionally present in the interview, talking about the last few months where he became Jimmy V's best friend, and really, like, as he said, like brothers, because Jimmy V was being treated at the hospital at Duke. And as this man is dying and trying to figure out a way to stay in the game and win, which was just the nature of Jim Valvano, that this became such a rich experience for Coach K. He feels it was really one of the transformative experiences in his own life and his career as a coach, was to spend the last 3 months with Coach V in this way, just talking basketball and talking about life, and really opened him up to a side of himself that most coaches don't allow to be open, because you can't be vulnerable when you can't be emotionally vulnerable as a coach of a major program, because you'll get killed, because there's so many people out to get you. And what Coach K learned from Coach V was that you can be, and you can even be a better coach, because you're going to share what you need to share of yourself better with your players if you allow yourself to be vulnerable, and you just have to be tough. And he learned that from V, and obviously he's become the greatest coach ever since then. So, he probably would have been anyway, but it's a nice story to hear from him.
Let's say Sam Perkins makes that 3 in the ACC tournament. What happens to Jimmy V?
I think he's just a guy who, coached. Maybe he becomes a broadcaster, because he's certain to get fired in a few years anyway, because he's so abrasive to so many people. Maybe actually he doesn't become a broadcaster because he doesn't really achieve very much as a coach.
Yeah.
And he just bounces around. He goes like Lefty Driesell. He goes from ACC to James Madison to who knows what, Maybe he becomes like Lou Saban or somebody like that, who's this great coach whose players really, understood it, but nobody else in the world did, because he never really won anything.
Because I wonder, you alluded to this in the documentary, like the celebrity of what happened to him as those 9 games went along in 1983 ended up kind of ruining his coaching career, because he became so enchanted with having this giant pulpit and entertaining people and doing speeches and all these different things that it inadvertently kind of killed his coaching career.
Yeah, it did, because he forgot, he lost sight of what he had to do, what made him great, which was the profound connection with the players. And, Whittenburg was really, I thought, very big as a person in the film in this way, talking about this subject, because he was very frank about it. He loves Valvano. He was the only ex-player who was a pallbearer at the funeral, and Jimmy V always referred to him as his son, because he had 3 daughters, and he said his one son was Derek Whittenburg. But Derek said, when he was his assistant coach, he said he forgot what made him great to begin with, which was he forgot to be a coach. He forgot to be with the players. But I don't like to look at it as if there was a choice. I think Valvano was like an all-in guy, and there was no cunning to him. He may have been a shrewd businessman, but I don't think there was a cunning in the way he lived his life. I don't think he could have behaved differently in situations, even had he wanted to, even had he been prescient enough to know that this is going to become his downfall. His fame that he sought so powerfully. He really loved the spotlight, and not only was he sort of not shy about it, but he embraced it and sought it out. And at first, that makes people love you when you're winning, right? But when you're not, people really don't want to hear that. But I don't think he could have done it any differently. I mean, I think it's true what you say, that it became his downfall, but I don't see it as a decision he made that was regrettable. I just think this is who he was put on earth to be, and it served him in one way at one point, and then it served him in another way at another point. I mean, maybe that's fatalistic, where Krzyzewski has faith, and I have just not so much of that. But I don't think he could have changed.
Yeah, maybe he's coaching, he's throwing himself into that, trying to get to the big one. Maybe his coaching career is completely different. Maybe he spends the next 20 years trying to get to the Final Four or whatever, and that's what becomes his motivation. You just don't know.
Yeah, you don't know. But I think the path that he found himself on, he couldn't have gotten off that path even had he wanted to. That was just who he was going to be. And I feel that way about Chris Herron too. A lot of people said to me after watching Unguarded that I thought it was so sad that he didn't fulfill who he might have been as a basketball player. And I don't feel that sadness about Chris Herron. I mean, look, the world has plenty of basketball players who are really, really good, and he would have been one of them. But I think what really gave him meaning in his life has been this, reaching out to others and being, giving testimony to the power of hope and recovery from addiction. And that's, he deals much more happily with other human beings as a guy who's, coaching basketball, or as a guy who's talking to people who need to hear his message, compared to how he felt being with people when he was playing basketball. He just that was not something that gave him much joy, and this really does. And so I think some people can't decide their way out of trouble, and but they're very, very fortunate to end up in a good place if they can avoid the trouble. I think V, through the power of his personality and charisma and vision of this V Foundation, ended up sort of becoming, a saint of the sports world, and deservedly so. And again, if he could have decided his way out of trouble when he was younger, it might never have happened. I mean, if he doesn't become a broadcaster and with ABC and getting to know all the people at ESPN, I mean, does ESPN champion the V Foundation, and does it become what it is? No way. If somebody doesn't think, let's do the ESPYs, and gives him that year when he's about to die in 6 weeks, it's unbelievable how the fate, power of fate works in this story.
Super nerdy filmmaking question for you. The structure of the doc was a little messed up in this one, because you don't want to do it from here's what happens and then he gets sick, and you almost want to introduce what happened to him earlier because people know it. And you also don't want the film to end with the ESPY speech, which is how everybody expected it to end probably when they were watching it. And during the rough cuts and stuff, I gotta be honest, I was a little worried about the structure. Like, is this going to work? You're introducing the cancer part relatively early, like during the run of the games and all this stuff. As you're the filmmaker and you're trying to sort that structure out in your head, do you ever have that moment where you're like, uh-oh, what if this doesn't work? I'm screwed.
Well, yeah, you always have that moment. But I can give you super nerdy answers to these questions, because that's what I love to talk about and think about. The structure of, we really had a purpose to weave the structure the way we did, to knit together the struggle against cancer with the run. And working it out was very difficult, and the support that you gave with notes, and John Dahl and Connor Shell at ESPN Films, who really, really helped, because it was difficult. And the first time I really did this was in the Louis Tiant film, Lost Son of Havana, which we had two sort of parallel narratives that we wove together. One was this trip to Cuba, where after 46 years, Louis Tiant encounters his long-lost family and is on sort of a journey of discovery in Cuba, and we have his life story. And those two wove together really easily and seamlessly. It was like, each one has an arc, right? They're like a rainbow, and it was like a double rainbow. The Cuba trip had a rainbow arc, and the life story had a rainbow arc, and they just sort of wove together very seamlessly and easily, relatively speaking. So I felt like, we're just going to do that again. It's going to be easy. What I was trying to do was to experience the run in 1983 with the emotion attached to it of this man is doomed to a premature death. And that every time they win, the emotion is going to be so much greater when you know what you didn't know in 1983, but today is that he's doomed. But just saying it isn't enough. You have to really, each element that you put in has to provide momentum to the next scene. So the ESPY speech, we always knew would go right before the Houston game, because that idea of don't give up, don't ever give up, in the face of a fight that you know you're going to lose, right? Like everybody knew State was going to lose to Houston. Don't give up, and then they go play the game. So now the power of this dying man saying don't ever give up, then rallying his team and getting them pumped up to come out and slay Goliath is like, that works, right? All the other stuff was really difficult. When to bring it in, because it's confusing, because you have the present day Derek Whittenberg narrative and all the teammates around the table and all the stuff that's taking place in present. He visits Coach Krzyzewski. It's all taking place in the present. The funeral, the film starts in the present. You have the 1983 storyline of the team winning, and then you have the 1993 storyline of Jimmy V getting sick and dying. So we were actually weaving three storylines in, and it became very confusing. And you saw it when you saw the first rough cut. It was not unwatchable, but it was very confusing, and you didn't know where you were. And I'd say the last month we spent working that out, and that was another reason why I was so pleased that the response to the film has been so good once it aired, because I really believed that we'd work it out, but I know 4 weeks before it aired, we hadn't worked it out. And it wasn't
I always had faith in Hock, but I was a little nervous for like a 2-day stretch there, just because structurally it was ambitious. You know what I mean? And even though it's like, all right, our team has pulled this off and Hock's done this, he's been here before. But it's almost like a game 7 where you're like, all right, we still have to make the shots. And that it was a relief when Connor emailed me and was like, just saw another rough cut. It got there. We made it. I was like, oh, well, that's great, because I knew we were going to make it, but it's still nice to know that you made it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I felt the same way. I mean, I appreciate that, but I really believed as a storyteller that this was the right way to tell the story.
Yeah.
And I believed that I'd get it there, and Jim Potter, it's the editor, that we'd get it there. But I wasn't sure how we were going to do it yet, but I did really think we were going to get it there. And then you get in the room and you do what you do, and yeah, I mean, I'm been doing this for a long time, and I do feel like, sometimes I feel like with things I don't know how I'm going to figure it out. I mean, when I was really scared was with Chris Herron. When we didn't do an interview with him, we just used the talks, where he speaks to the kids, and he speaks to the soldiers, and he speaks to the convicts, and he speaks to the addicts, and he speaks to all these people who he speaks to in real life. We told the whole story in those speeches as opposed to sit-down interview, which, when that idea hit me, I remember I was in Fresno with Chris, and things were going horribly. And he was mad at me, and he didn't know what's going on with the film, and I couldn't answer any of his questions, and I was lost. And then it hit me that we were going to use these speeches. He had just spoken to the convicts that day, and that night in the moldy motel in Fresno where I was staying, I said, you know what? I don't need to do an interview. I don't need to do anything. I just need to use these speeches. And I called Connor, and I said, listen, this is my idea. I don't know if it's going to work, but I think it will. And if we go down this road, we're stuck because we won't be able to undo it in time. And he said, you know, I believe in you. Go for it. And that was pretty awesome coaching on his part, because it really gave me the space to, you know, find the answer myself, and to know that he had my back. If it failed, that was huge for me. And that I thought that one worked out really well. And I'm, you know, really, really appreciative of that, because I think most network executives, certainly some that I've worked with, not at ESPN, would never do that in a million years, would never say, I've got your back, even if it turns out bad. I believe in you. They would say, no, I've got to see it. And if I don't like it, you're going to have to redo it in the last 2 weeks. And that's why so much stuff ends up terrible, because you can't undo something with, you know, 2 weeks before air, which is what you would have had to do.
Yeah, or they would have told you to just do it conventionally, because that would have been the safe way to do it. And they knew that would have been, no, just go for the solid B-, which is really the whole reason we started this series. I mean, you know, this second version of the series has been, now we know how to do it. And the first 30, I think we had like 8 or 9 that we're really happy with, and then maybe another 10 or 12 that you're relatively happy with, and then maybe there's 8 or 9 others where you're like, man, I wish we knew then what we know now. Mm-hmm. I think that's the big difference. And this, like, now we know what we're doing, and we know who to work with, and you know who to trust, and especially somebody like you, where we've done so many things with, where it's just like you learn to trust certain things. And it's weird because writing a column's like that sometimes too, especially on a deadline or something where you have 3 hours and you have an empty Microsoft Word document, and you're just like, oh crap, I don't totally know where this is going, but I just have to trust all the other times I did it. And if you can trust that, and you kind of go through this cloud of smoke and come out and it's fine, and that happens enough times, then that almost becomes part of the whole process.
That is something that I can't fathom how you do that. How you write on deadline, such short deadlines. I mean, I did a couple of years of live TV, and I could not handle it. I mean, I need to really think about it and mull it over and have, you know, sleepless night after sleepless night before I start to feel like I can start putting it together. And, you know, the way you other writers like you know, bang it out and with that ticking clock, I don't know how you do it, because I can't quite, it's not my nature to function well in that environment.
But it's the same exact thing like what you described before. You just trust the process. And like you hit, whether it's a column, I'm sure this happens to people when they're writing, you know, they have some album due in 2 weeks that they're writing the songs for, and they only have 7 songs. And after, you know, if you've done something enough times, no matter what it is, I think you just end up trusting your experiences from the previous times. And then that's how it gets done. Wait, I wanted to ask you about, can we talk about the next 30 for 30, or are we not allowed to yet?
I don't see why not. Has it not been announced or something? I don't know.
You know what? I just made an executive decision. I think we just say what the next 30 for 30 is. I think people will be excited. Plus, you're far enough down the road anyway. It's not like somebody can steal the idea.
Yeah, people have tried over it.
Tell people
we're in.
Tell people what the next one is.
The next 30 for 30 is about the 1980 Soviet hockey team.
The Soviet hockey team, not the American hockey team. The Soviet hockey team.
The Soviet hockey team. This is a hockey team that is probably the greatest single hockey team ever assembled, that had a run before and after the game in Lake Placid, the Miracle on Ice game, had the most decorated run of any single team ever in any sport, and
suffered the most devastating loss in the history of sports.
Exactly, except for the one game that we all remember them for. And what's interesting is to revisit, 30 however many years later, it'll be 34 years later when this airs next February, in time for the Olympics in Russia, how one's life is colored by one moment, and how you allow it to be, how you allow your whole life, or you don't allow your whole life to be defined by something that was an aberration for you.
All right, you're giving away too much now. Just stop.
Can I just say one thing?
Yeah.
Slava Fetisov, who was a member of that team and, became on the the defenseman on the all-century team and anyway, Hall of Fame and all that. He said the other night, we were actually filming with him, and he was talking about something. He's in politics in Russia now, and he said, I'm tired of it. I said, what are you tired of? He said, just the people, what they try to do to you. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, they try to defeat you, and they try to defeat you, and they don't know that you cannot be defeated. And he was serious. Like, he was talking about his life now as a politician, and I was like, wow, this dude is awesome. This is going to be an amazing film.
Well, I remember one of my favorite things about the Russian part of that game was after, when the Americans were celebrating, the Russians watching them, kind of like stunned that people could react to a win that way, because hockey had become such a grind for them. It was almost like they were watching the Americans going, man, I wish sports meant something like that to me, because it's been beaten out of me, basically. Well, that was the feeling I got anyway from watching them. But
yeah, one of the players was quoted as saying that was the beginning of a sort of an awakening of a consciousness among Soviet athletes, that because they did play the game with a great joy, but they weren't ever allowed to show it.
Right.
And but that, why does it have to be this way? And a few of those guys on that team were the ones who broke away from the Soviet Union or
right.
broke away from Soviet hockey and came to the NHL. And now, of course, the way they played hockey is the way everyone plays hockey. Canadian hockey is kind of Russian hockey now, the way it's played. And that's these guys on this team that lost to the U.S. They're the ones.
All right, we're giving away too much.
All right.
I'm really excited for this one, though. We're basically flipping around the greatest sports moment in the history of America and telling the side of the worst sports moment in the history of Russia. I think it's a great idea. It can't miss, especially because you're involved. Jon Hock, we will see you probably on Grantland. Will be your next stop in the ESPN universe, I'm sure, with a hockeymentary at some point. Thank you for everything you're doing for us. It's a pleasure to work with you.
Thank you, Bill. The pleasure is all mine, believe me. Thanks.
We'll talk to you soon.
Yep.
We're going to throw to a part 2 with Chuck Klosterman. Before we did that, I wanted to say hello to our new sponsor, Stamps.com. Here's the thing with Stamps.com. You know how you get this podcast on demand? Well, now you can get stamps on demand, too. You don't have to go to the post office. It sucks to go to the post office. Why not just go online and buy stamps and print them out? We have a little special offer for you. If you use the promo code BS on Stamps.com, in the right corner, just follow the instructions, put in the BS. You can sign up. A no-risk trial. You get a $110 bonus offer. It includes a digital scale, up to $55 in free postage. It's fantastic. Go to Stamps.com. Go on there. Click on the microphone at the top of the homepage. Type in BS. Follow the instructions. and do your thing. Get some stamps. Skip the post office. We hate the post office. We don't hate the post office, but you know what I mean. Anyway, part 2 coming up. Chuck Klosterman. Check it out.
So I get to sign off. Whoa!
Thank you for downloading the BS Report with Bill Simmons.
Too much fun.
Check out more podcasts at the iTunes Music Store or at Podcenter at ESPNradio.com.
Peace out.
Geico presents Strange Savings Stories. Astronomers detected an interstellar transmission. It stated, Geico, 15 minutes could save you 15% or more. The implications were staggering. Was the cosmos telling us we could all save hundreds on car insurance with Geico? Or did their radar merely pick up a signal from the nearby Rufus and Clyde's morning show? We may never know.
Geico. 15 minutes could save you 15% or more on car insurance.